Rain slammed against the studio windows when Jimin's trembling voice finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" he whispered, staring at Jungkook with eyes already filled with tears before the younger man could even answer. The practice room smelled faintly of sweat, rainwater, and cold coffee abandoned hours ago. Neon lights from the city bled through the glass walls, painting the floor in streaks of blue and purple. Jungkook stood frozen near the doorway, his black hoodie soaked from the storm outside, water dripping slowly from his hair onto the polished floor. Jimin had never seen him look like this. Not exhausted, not nervous, guilty. The phone in Jimin's hand shook violently. The screen was still glowing with the photograph someone had anonymously sent him 30 minutes earlier. Jungkook sitting beside another man in a hospital hallway at 3 a.m, his head lowered, fingers tightly clasped around someone else's hand. It should not have hurt this much, but it did, because for 3 months, Jungkook had been disappearing without explanation. Late-night calls unanswered, sudden canceled dinners, empty promises, smiles that looked rehearsed. Every time Jimin asked if something was wrong, Jungkook only laughed softly and kissed his forehead as if affection alone could bury suspicion. Now the lies were standing directly in front of him. "You said you were sleeping," Jimin said quietly, voice cracking. "You said you were tired." Opened his mouth, but no words came out. Outside, thunder shook the glass. Jimin hated silence. Jungkook knew that better than anyone. Silence was dangerous because Jimin's mind filled it with terrible things. Abandonment, betrayal, the fear of becoming unimportant. His chest tightened painfully. "Who is he?" Jimin asked. Jungkook looked away. That tiny movement shattered something inside him. Jimin laughed once, bitter and broken. "Wow, so it's true." "No," Jungkook said quickly. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me." His voice echoed across the empty studio. Even Jungkook flinched. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Rain continued tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Somewhere downstairs, distant music vibrated through the building, muffled and ghost-like. Jimin stared at Jungkook's face, searching desperately for familiarity, for comfort, for honesty. Instead, he found fear, and that frightened him more than anything else. Jungkook slowly walked closer. "Jimin, listen to me first. Do you know what hurts the most?" Jimin interrupted softly. Tears finally spilled down his cheeks. "It's not the photo, it's not even the lying, it's the fact that you looked happier there than you've looked with me in months." Jungkook's expression collapsed. The younger man looked suddenly exhausted, as though he had been carrying something unbearably heavy for far too long. "You think I wanted this?" Jungkook whispered. "Then why hide it?" "Because I was scared." The words almost escaped Jungkook's lips, but he swallowed them, scared of losing you, scared you'd hate me, scared that if you knew the truth, you would finally realize how broken I really am. But fear had always made Jungkook selfish, and selfishness had consequences. Jimin wiped his tears angrily. "I waited for you every night." Each word sounded sharper now. "I defended you when everyone said you were changing." "Step closer." "I told myself you still cared about me." "Closer." "You couldn't even trust me enough to tell me the truth." Jungkook finally reached him, but Jimin stepped back immediately. That hurt more than shouting ever could. The distance between them suddenly felt enormous. Jungkook lowered his gaze to the floor. His fingers curled tightly at his sides, nails digging into his palms. It was an old habit he had whenever panic started consuming him. Jimin noticed. Of course he noticed. He always noticed everything about Jungkook. That was the problem. "You haven't been sleeping again," Jimin murmured automatically. Jungkook looked up, startled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His lips were pale from exhaustion. Even now, Jimin's heart betrayed him by worrying first before staying angry. "You still care," Jungkook whispered. Jimin's face twisted painfully. "That's what makes this so unfair." The room felt smaller suddenly, hotter, harder to breathe. Jungkook wanted to explain everything. The hospital visits, the secret phone calls, the panic attacks returning after years, the unbearable guilt he carried alone every single day. But another memory stopped him cold. A hospital corridor, white lights, blood on trembling fingers, a doctor saying words Jungkook still heard in nightmares. If this continues, he might not survive the stress. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. He had promised himself nobody else would get hurt because of him, especially not Jimin. "I was trying to protect you," he finally said. Jimin stared at him in disbelief. "Protect me from what?" Silence again. Jungkook hated himself for it because he knew exactly how silence wounded Jimin. The older man laughed shakily through tears. "You know what's funny? I kept thinking maybe I wasn't enough anymore." Jungkook's eyes widened immediately. "Don't say that." "It's true," Jimin cried. Do you know how lonely it feels to love someone who keeps disappearing? The words struck harder than any accusation. Jungkook remembered every ignored message, every cancelled plan, every moment Jimin smiled and pretended he was okay. Guilt clawed viciously through his chest. "You are enough," Jungkook whispered hoarsely. "You've always been enough." "Then why do I feel like I'm losing you?" Jungkook couldn't answer, because the truth was terrifying, because part of him already felt lost. The storm outside intensified violently, rain crashing against the glass in waves. Lights flickered briefly overhead before stabilizing again. The city beyond the windows looked blurred and distant, like another world entirely. Jimin slowly sank onto the practice room floor, exhausted by his own emotions. His shoulders shook silently as he pressed trembling hands against his face. Jungkook stared at him helplessly. This was the side of Jimin nobody else saw, not the performer, not the idol. Just Park Jimin, a man who loved too deeply and broke too quietly. Jungkook carefully sat several feet away, afraid getting closer would only make things worse. For several minutes only the sound of rain filled the room. Then Jimin spoke again, voice barely audible. "I would have stayed." Looked at him. "If you had told me the truth," Jimin continued, staring at the floor, "I would have stayed anyway." Something inside Jungkook cracked completely. He covered his mouth suddenly, eyes burning. Jimin turned in shock as Jungkook's breathing became uneven. Panic, real panic. Jungkook tried hiding it, but his hands were trembling uncontrollably now. "Jungkook?" The younger man shook his head quickly. "I'm fine." Obviously not fine. Immediately moved closer despite everything. Instinct overpowering anger. He grabbed Jungkook's wrist gently and froze, cold. His skin was freezing cold. "Have you eaten today?" No answer. Jimin's expression hardened with realization. "How long have you been like this?" Still silence. Jimin suddenly understood something terrifying. Jungkook wasn't hiding another person. He was hiding himself, all the exhaustion, the fear, the suffering, the loneliness. Jimin felt anger dissolve into something far more painful, heartbreak. "You idiot," he whispered, tears returning instantly. "Why are you carrying this alone?" Jungkook's eyes finally overflowed. "I didn't want you to see me falling apart." His voice sounded small, fragile, nothing like the confident Jungkook the world knew. Jimin stared at him quietly as pieces finally connected together in his mind. The hospital, the sleepless nights, the emotional distance, the forced smiles. Jungkook had been drowning silently while pretending he could still breathe. And somehow that hurt even more than betrayal. Jimin slowly reached for his hand. This time, Jungkook didn't pull away. The rain continued falling outside as both of them sat on the cold studio floor, surrounded by shadows, exhaustion, and truths that had finally begun surfacing after months of silence. Jimin squeezed Jungkook's trembling hand gently. "You should have trusted me enough to stay beside you," he whispered. Jungkook lowered his head, unable to stop crying anymore. For the first time in months, neither of them hid their pain. Jungkook cried without making a sound. Tears slipped endlessly down his face while his shoulders trembled beneath the oversized black hoodie. Jimin sat beside him in silence, still holding his cold hand carefully, as if loosening his grip for even a second might make Jungkook disappear again. The practice room felt quieter now, not peaceful, just fragile. Outside, the storm had softened into a steady rain, droplets sliding slowly down the tall glass windows like tears racing toward the city lights below. Somewhere far away, traffic hummed faintly beneath the thunder. Jimin looked at Jungkook's lowered face and remembered something he once said years ago during trainee days. "You cry like you're apologizing for existing." Back then, Jungkook laughed it off. Tonight, the memory hurt. "Long?" Jimin asked softly. Jungkook wiped his face quickly, embarrassed. "What? How long have you been pretending?" The younger man stayed silent. Jimin expected that. Jungkook had always been terrible at asking for help. He carried pain the same way some people carried secrets, buried so deeply that even breathing around them became difficult. Jimin leaned back against the mirrored wall behind them. The cold surface pressed against his spine, grounding him slightly. "You stopped sleeping after the tour ended, did you?" Jungkook's eyes widened briefly. That was answer enough. Jimin exhaled shakily. He remembered the little things now. Jungkook falling asleep during car rides, the untouched meals, the sudden habit of staring blankly at nothing for minutes at a time. The way he constantly rubbed his chest when anxiety became unbearable, and somehow Jimin missed how serious it had become. Guilt settled heavily inside him. "You should have told me," he whispered. "I tried." Looked at him immediately. Jungkook swallowed hard. "Every time I almost did, you smiled at me." That doesn't make sense. It does to me. His voice cracked quietly. You looked happy, Jimin. I didn't want to ruin that. Stared at him in disbelief. So instead you pushed me away until I thought you didn't love me anymore. Jungkook closed his eyes. That wasn't supposed to happen. But it did. The words landed between them heavily. Jimin hated how exhausted Jungkook looked. Even sitting still seemed difficult for him now. There was a hollowness in his eyes Jimin had never noticed before. Not sadness, burnout, the dangerous kind. Jimin suddenly remembered the last real argument they had 2 months ago. You're never here anymore, Jimin had snapped back then. Jungkook only replied quietly, I'm trying. The time Jimin thought it sounded careless. Now he realized it sounded desperate. A painful silence settled over the room again before Jungkook finally spoke. The person in the hospital phoned. He hesitated. It was my therapist. Jimin blinked. What? Jungkook looked ashamed. I started having panic attacks again. Confession hit harder than Jimin expected. Jungkook continued staring at the floor while speaking, unable to meet his eyes. At first it only happened at night, then during schedules, then before performances. His breathing slowed unevenly. Sometimes I couldn't breathe at all. Jimin's chest tightened painfully. Why didn't you tell me? Because everyone already depends on me. Answer came instantly, too instantly. Like he had repeated those words to himself hundreds of times before. Jimin looked away, jaw tightening emotionally. That was always Jungkook's problem. He believed being loved meant being strong all the time, no weakness, no fear, no breaking. Even now he sat there apologizing with his posture alone. I thought I could handle it myself, Jungkook admitted quietly. But then it kept getting worse. His fingers trembled again. Jimin noticed immediately and gently covered them with his own hand, warm, steady. Jungkook looked at their hands silently, emotions flickering across his exhausted face. The hospital called me because I collapsed after practice last month, he confessed. Jimin froze completely. What? I told them not to tell anyone. You collapsed. Jungkook nodded faintly. The room suddenly felt too small again. Jimin stood up abruptly, overwhelmed emotions crashing into him all at once. You passed out and didn't tell me. Jungkook flinched at the sudden anger. Jimin ran frustrated hands through his hair, packing across the studio floor now. What were you thinking? I didn't want to worry you. That's not your decision to make. His voice cracked loudly through the room. Jungkook lowered his gaze again. That only made Jimin more emotional. You keep deciding everything alone, Jimin whispered harshly. You decide when to disappear. You decide when to suffer. You decide when to lie. Burned his eyes again. And then you leave me outside all of it like I'm a stranger. Jungkook's face twisted painfully. You're not a stranger. Then stop treating me like one. Words shattered something fragile between them. Jungkook suddenly stood too, breathing unevenly now. I was scared, okay? He burst out. Jimin fell silent. For the first time tonight, Jungkook's composure completely broke apart. His eyes were red. His voice trembled violently. I was terrified all the time, he admitted. Every day I woke up feeling exhausted before the day even started. I couldn't breathe properly anymore. I couldn't think straight. Sometimes I looked at you and felt guilty for ruining your happiness just by existing near you. Jimin's anger disappeared instantly. Jungkook laughed bitterly through tears. You know what the therapist asked me? He whispered. He asked when was the last time I felt genuinely okay. Younger man looked completely lost now, and I couldn't answer. The confession hurt more than anything else tonight. Jimin slowly walked closer again. Jungkook's eyes looked empty in a way that frightened him deeply, not dramatic, not theatrical, just tired, dangerously tired. You're not ruining my happiness, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook shook his head immediately. You don't understand. Then make me understand. Stared at him for a long moment before speaking again. When people start falling apart, he whispered, they become heavy. Jimin frowned slightly. Father used to say that. The room went still. Jungkook rarely talked about his childhood. He said exhausted people drag everyone down with them eventually. A faint smile appeared on his lips, but it looked broken. I think part of me believed that. Jimin's heart ached instantly. No wonder Jungkook kept suffering alone. He genuinely believed pain made him unlovable. Jimin stepped closer until barely inches separated them. Look at me. Slowly, Jungkook obeyed. You are not a burden. Jungkook's eyes filled again immediately. You don't get to decide how much of your pain I'm willing to carry, Jimin continued softly. Because if it's you, I'll carry all of it. A sharp breath escaped Jungkook's lips. Jimin could literally see the moment those words broke through the walls he had spent months building. The younger man covered his eyes suddenly, overwhelmed. I'm so tired, Jimin. was barely louder than the rain outside, but it shattered Jimin completely. He immediately pulled Jungkook into his arms. This time, Jungkook didn't resist. The younger man collapsed against him instantly, gripping the back of Jimin's shirt tightly like someone drowning finally reaching air. Jimin held him carefully as quiet sobs shook Jungkook's body. "You don't have to survive everything alone anymore," Jimin whispered against his hair. For several minutes, neither of them moved. The storm outside slowly faded. Only the city lights remained glowing beyond the windows now, soft and blurred against the wet glass. Jimin closed his eyes briefly while holding him. And for the first time in months, Jungkook finally allowed someone to see how broken he really felt.
Jungkook fell asleep in Jimin's arms without realizing it. One moment he was still trembling quietly against Jimin's chest, and the next his breathing had slowed into something softer, heavier, exhausted beyond resistance. His fingers remained curled tightly in the fabric of Jimin's shirt, even in sleep, as though letting go might pull him back into whatever darkness he had been hiding from. Jimin looked down at him silently. The practice room lights reflected faintly against Jungkook's damp eyelashes. Up close, the exhaustion was impossible to ignore now. His skin looked pale beneath the cold fluorescent lighting, lips slightly dry, shadows dark beneath closed eyes. He looked younger when asleep, not like the confident performer millions admired, just Jungkook, a boy who had pushed himself too far for too long. Jimin carefully brushed wet strands of hair away from his forehead. His chest tightened painfully at how warm Jungkook's skin suddenly felt. Fever. Seriously, Jimin whispered to himself. How bad were you hiding this? The rain outside had finally stopped, leaving only streaks of water sliding down the windows and distant city lights flickering against the night sky. The studio felt strangely calm now, almost unreal after everything that had happened. Jimin stayed still for a while longer, listening to Jungkook breathe. There had been a time when this sound alone made him feel safe. Maybe it still did. Slowly, Jimin adjusted his position and tried to stand carefully without waking him, but Jungkook stirred immediately, panic appearing on his face before his eyes were even fully open. "Go." The words came out rough and frightened. Jimin froze. Jungkook blinked awake, clearly disoriented before embarrassment quickly crossed his face. He loosened his grip on Jimin's shirt immediately. "Sorry," he muttered quietly. Jimin's heart hurt again. Even now, Jungkook apologized for needing someone. "I was just trying to get you home," Jimin said softly. Jungkook looked around the empty studio as if realizing where he was for the first time. A faint flush spread across his cheeks when he noticed he had fallen asleep against Jimin. "You should have woken me. You needed rest more than another apology." Jungkook lowered his eyes. Jimin stood slowly and held out his hand. "Come on." For a second, Jungkook hesitated, not because he didn't want to take it, because he did, too much. Carefully, he placed his hand in Jimin's. Warmth spread instantly through both of them. Neither spoke about it. The hallway outside the practice room was empty and dimly lit. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago, leaving only the low hum of vending machines and distant elevator sounds filling the silence. Jimin walked slightly ahead while Jungkook followed quietly beside him. Normally, Jungkook would talk first. Tonight, he looked emotionally drained just from existing. As they waited for the elevator, Jimin glanced sideways at him. "You really collapsed after practice." Jungkook sighed softly. "The doctor said it was exhaustion. You still kept working. I didn't know how to stop." That answer sounded painfully honest. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Inside, mirrors lined the walls, reflecting their tired faces back at them from every angle. Jimin hated how distant they looked standing side by side, like strangers pretending to remember each other. The elevator descended quietly. Jungkook suddenly leaned back against the wall, eyes closing briefly. "You're swaying," Jimin noticed immediately. "Fine. You need to stop saying that." A weak laugh escaped Jungkook's lips. The sound surprised both of them. It was small, but real. Jimin stared at him quietly. He had missed hearing Jungkook laugh naturally. Not the practiced version cameras captured. This one messy, tired, human. The elevator doors opened again. Cold night air greeted them the moment they stepped outside the building. The streets glistened from rainwater, reflecting neon signs across the pavement like shattered stars. Jimin instinctively moved closer when a sharp wind passed through them. Jungkook noticed. "You're cold," he murmured. "Says the man with a fever." Smiled faintly at that. A dangerous warmth spread through Jimin's chest seeing it. Because despite everything tonight, the lies, the hurt, the exhaustion, one small smile from Jungkook still had the power to undo him completely. They walked toward the parked car slowly. The city around them felt unusually quiet for Seoul at night. Occasional headlights passed across empty streets while distant music spilled from restaurants preparing to close. Jimin unlocked the passenger door first. Jungkook blinked. "You're driving? You look like you'd fall asleep at a red light." "Only happened once. Twice." Jungkook actually laughed softly this time. Jimin stared at him for half a second too long. Jungkook noticed that too. The laughter faded slowly into something quieter, something heavier. Jimin looked away first. The drive home began in silence. Soft music played low through the speakers while rainwater hissed beneath the tires against wet roads. Jungkook rested his head against the window, watching blurred city lights pass by one after another. Jimin kept glancing at him every few minutes, checking if he was okay, checking if he was still there. After a while, Jungkook spoke quietly. "You were really hurt." Jimin tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel. "You lied to me for months." "I know. I thought you stopped loving me." Jungkook immediately turned toward him. "What?" Jimin kept his eyes on the road. "There were nights I sat awake wondering what I did wrong." His voice remained calm but painfully so. "You stopped looking at me the same way." Jungkook's chest tightened sharply. "That wasn't because I loved you less." "Then why?" The younger man struggled for words. "Because loving you started scaring me. Because the more exhausted I became, the more terrified I was that you'd eventually leave once you saw the worst parts of me. Because I didn't know how to be loved while falling apart." Jungkook stared down at his trembling hands. "I didn't know how to let you see me like this," he admitted quietly. Jimin finally looked at him then. Streetlights passed across Jungkook's face in shifting gold and shadow. "You think I only love the good parts of you?" The question hurt because maybe Jungkook did believe that. Jimin exhaled shakily. "You idiot," he whispered again, softer this time. Jungkook looked away, eyes burning. Silence returned between them, but it no longer felt cold, just fragile, honest. By the time they reached Jimin's apartment building, the city had become almost completely still. Midnight had long passed. Only a few windows remained lit among the towering buildings surrounding them. Jungkook frowned slightly as Jimin parked the car. "This isn't my place. You're staying with me tonight." Jungkook hesitated instantly. "Jimin," that wasn't a question. Older man stepped out before Jungkook could argue further. For some reason that made Jungkook smile again, tiny, unconscious, but real. Inside the apartment, warmth immediately surrounded them. The familiar scent of fabric softener and vanilla candles lingered faintly in the air. Jimin kicked off his shoes near the entrance while Jungkook stood awkwardly nearby, suddenly uncertain. It had been a long time since he stayed here comfortably. Too long. Jimin disappeared briefly into the kitchen before returning with a glass of water and medicine. "Take these." Jungkook blinked. "You still keep cold medicine? You get sick every winter." Answer came too naturally. Both of them froze slightly afterward because despite months of distance, Jimin still remembered things about him automatically. Jungkook accepted the medicine quietly. Jimin watched carefully until he swallowed it. Then, softer now, he asked, "When was the last time you slept properly?" Jungkook thought for a moment. "I don't remember." That answer terrified Jimin more than he expected. The apartment suddenly felt unbearably quiet. Jimin walked closer slowly until only a small distance remained between them. "You don't have to keep surviving like this anymore," he whispered. Jungkook looked at him silently, tired eyes barely held together emotions. And underneath all of it, fear, not fear of pain, fear of being abandoned because of it. Jimin reached up carefully and touched his cheek. "You should have come to me sooner." Leaned unconsciously into the warmth of his hand before stopping himself halfway. That tiny movement broke Jimin's heart all over again, so Jimin closed the remaining distance himself and gently pulled him into another embrace. This time, Jungkook held him back immediately. Jungkook held him carefully at first, as if he still wasn't sure he deserved to. His arms wrapped slowly around Jimin's waist, hesitant and fragile, but the moment Jimin tightened the embrace, something inside Jungkook unraveled again. The younger man buried his face against Jimin's shoulder, breathing unevenly as though he had spent months holding himself together with nothing but exhaustion and fear. Jimin closed his eyes. The warmth of Jungkook's body against his felt painfully familiar, too familiar. It reminded him of late nights after concerts when Jungkook used to cling to him silently because adrenaline made sleeping impossible. It reminded him of winter mornings tangled together beneath blankets while snow covered the city outside. It reminded him of all the little moments that once felt permanent, and maybe that was what hurt the most. Nothing had truly disappeared between them. It had only been buried beneath silence. "You're burning up," Jimin murmured softly against his hair. "I'll survive," pulled back immediately and gave him a tired look. "If you say that one more time, I'm actually going to get angry." A weak smile touched Jungkook's lips again. There it was, that tiny expression Jimin had missed so much. Not the perfect smile cameras adored. This one felt real, small, crooked, honest. Jimin's chest tightened unexpectedly. For a second, neither of them moved. The apartment lights were dim, casting soft shadows across the room. Outside the windows, rainwater still clung to the glass while the city glowed quietly beneath the night sky. Jungkook looked exhausted standing there, not just physically, emotionally, like someone who had been carrying invisible weight for far too long. "Come sit down before you fall over," Jimin said gently. They moved toward the couch slowly. Jungkook sank into the cushions with a quiet sigh, leaning his head back briefly as if even sitting required energy now. Jimin disappeared into the kitchen again. The sound of cabinets opening echoed softly through the apartment while Jungkook stared blankly at the ceiling. His body felt strange, heavy, not from sickness alone, from relief. And that terrified him almost as much as the panic attacks did, because relief meant lowering his guard. Relief meant trusting someone enough to see the ugly parts. He wasn't used to that anymore. Jimin returned carrying a steaming bowl of soup. Jungkook blinked in surprise. "You cooked?" "It's ramen, not a 5-star meal." "You still cooked?" Jimin placed the bowl carefully on the table in front of him. Steam curled softly into the air, carrying warmth and the familiar smell of broth and garlic. For some reason, that simple smell made Jungkook's throat tighten emotionally. He couldn't remember the last time someone took care of him without expecting him to pretend he was okay first. Jimin noticed the look on his face immediately. "What?" Jungkook shook his head quickly. "Nothing." "Liar," the word wasn't harsh. Just quiet knowing. Jungkook stared down at the soup silently before finally whispering, "I forgot what this feels like." Jimin's expression softened instantly. "What? Being taken care of?" The confession made the apartment feel painfully quiet again. Jimin sat beside him slowly. "You take care of everyone else so much," he said softly. "Did you really think nobody wanted to do the same for you?" Jungkook laughed faintly under his breath. "That's different." "How? I'm supposed to handle things." Jimin frowned immediately. "Says who?" Jungkook opened his mouth but no answer came out because honestly he didn't know anymore. Maybe the pressure had become part of him long ago. The expectations, the constant need to stay strong, to keep smiling, to never become difficult or exhausting for others. Even now, part of him feared Jimin would eventually get tired too. Everyone did eventually, didn't they? Jimin watched the storm of emotions move silently across Jungkook's face. "You really believe people only love you when you're useful," he realized quietly. Jungkook's eyes widened slightly. The fact that Jimin understood so quickly almost hurt. "I didn't mean to," Jungkook whispered. "You do." Silence confirmed it. Jimin leaned back against the couch cushions slowly, staring toward the rain-covered windows. "You know what I think?" he said after a while. Jungkook glanced at him quietly. "I think you've been lonely for a very long time." The words landed gently, but they hit deeper than shouting ever could. Jungkook looked down immediately, blinking hard, because loneliness was exactly the word, not physical loneliness, worse, the kind where you stand surrounded by people and still feel unreachable, the kind where smiling becomes automatic because explaining the truth feels impossible. Jimin continued softly, "And I think you got so used to carrying everything alone that now you don't know how to stop." Jungkook's throat tightened painfully. No one had ever described it that accurately before. The younger man suddenly looked away toward the dark windows, jaw tense. "I hated myself for needing help." Turned toward him immediately. Jungkook's voice sounded hollow now. "Every panic attack made me feel weak." His fingers curled tightly together. "And every time I almost told you, I imagined the look on your face if you realized how messed up I actually was." Jimin's heart cracked quietly. "You think I would have looked at you differently?" "I didn't know." That honesty hurt. Jimin moved closer without thinking. "You should know this by now," he whispered. "Nothing about you scares me." Jungkook's eyes burned instantly again, because maybe that was all he wanted to hear these past few months, not solutions, not advice, just reassurance that he wasn't becoming impossible to love. Jimin gently reached up and touched beneath his eyes, wiping away tears before they could fall. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself for being human." Jungkook closed his eyes briefly at the touch, warm, safe, dangerously safe. When he opened them again, his voice came out smaller than before. "What if I can't get better?" Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took Jungkook's trembling hand carefully into his own. Then he squeezed it once. "You don't have to heal overnight," he said quietly. "You just don't get to disappear anymore." The words wrapped around Jungkook's exhausted heart painfully softly. No anger, no conditions, just stay. Jungkook lowered his head suddenly, shoulders shaking again. Jimin immediately moved closer. "I'm sorry," Jungkook whispered brokenly. "I'm so sorry for hurting you." Jimin's eyes strung. He hated hearing Jungkook apologize like this. Like guilt was stitched directly into his lungs. "You did hurt me," Jimin admitted honestly. Jungkook flinched slightly. "I think you were hurting yourself even worse." filled the apartment. The clock on the wall ticked softly somewhere behind them while cars moved faintly below the building outside. Jungkook looked exhausted enough to collapse again at any second. Jimin noticed immediately. "You need sleep." "Okay," gave him a look. Jungkook sighed weakly. "Right, sorry." That made Jimin smile despite everything, tiny, but real. "There's the Jungkook I know." Younger man stared at him quietly after that. There was warmth in Jimin's eyes again now, not the cold distance from earlier tonight, and somehow that scared Jungkook too, because hope was terrifying after months of believing he had ruined everything. "Jimin," he whispered carefully. Why are you still here?" The question sounded painfully genuine. Jimin looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because I love you." Certain, no hesitation. Jungkook's breath caught instantly. Jimin continued softly, "And loving someone doesn't suddenly stop the moment they become difficult." Younger man looked down quickly, overwhelmed emotions crashing through him all over again. Jimin reached for his hand again before speaking quietly. "Stop trying to survive alone." Outside, the clouds slowly began clearing above the city for the first time all night, revealing faint moonlight through the glass windows, while Jungkook sat there holding Jimin's hand like it was the only thing keeping him together.